All right, welcome everyone. We'll be waiting a few more minutes for everyone to join. Get a cup of coffee, get comfortable, and we'll be starting in about 2 to 3 minutes. Maybe in the meantime, there is a chat window on the right side of the window, and let me know where you guys are from. So maybe you can quickly type in your current location. So you can do that on the right side, where we'll also be taking questions during the talk. Karin from Nuremberg in Germany. Hello, hello. London, Berlin, Bern. Oh, pretty international crowd. Dimitris from London, welcome. Oslo, wow. Hello, Irina. All right, people are still coming in, so let's wait another minute. Andrew from London. Lots of people from Germany too. That's exciting. Okay, cool. I guess people will be still joining as we speak, but I welcome you to another edition of the Fireside chat. This time we'll be talking about how to build a UX team from the ground up and sort of foster a customer-centric company mindset in the process, because that's what our guest has been doing for the past couple of years. Now, just to explain real quick what the Fireside Chat is all about. So it's a new format where we interview movers and shakers from the UX scene from all over the world and look under the hood of their daily practice and hopefully get some thought-provoking ideas for our own work in the process. So our conversation will take about 30 minutes, and then we'll have time for 10 to 15 minutes of a Q&A. So you can use the chat window on your right to ask questions, and then we'll address them in the Q&A part at the end. So, quick introduction round. My name is Sandro. I am from Testing Time and will be your host today. So Testing Time is a Europe-wide participant recruitment service with a pool of over 250,000 spread across Europe. So if you go to testingtime.com, you can go online, define your target group, and we'll provide you with matching participants within 48 hours. But we're not doing this alone. We do this in collaboration with a company called Tech Circus, and they do a lot of UX design and UX research related events. And one particular one that I would like to point out is the ECommerce Design Summit. It will be taking place on April 4th and 5th in London, and it's the world's first two-day summit dedicated to showcasing the impact of experience-led product strategy and design, basically in building of successful retail, travel, and leisure e-commerce platforms. So if you don't have a ticket yet, you can go to ecommercedesign.summit.com. Let me quickly paste in the link for you, so you can check that out as well. 1 second. And get a ticket there if you don't have one yet. And also, our guest today will be speaking at the E-commerce Design Summit. Please welcome with me Martyn Redding, Head of Digital Experience at Virgin Atlantic. Welcome, Martyn.
Hi,
Do you
Sandra.
want to talk a bit about your background and what you've been doing the past couple of years, and yeah.
Okay. It's my background. So I'm kind of knocking on a bit and pretty old now. So I've been doing this for quite a long time. I graduated back in 2001. And I started my career, I studied design and I started my career in agencies. And at that point, designing digital products, designing things for the web didn't really exist as a practice necessarily. So I'm in my first job in an ad agency in front of a client who's a very big car manufacturer, and they started asking questions about their internet presence. And my creative director turned to them and said, "Yes, Martyn here knows loads about this." So I left that meeting and quickly tried to learn a lot about it because I knew nothing whatsoever. I learned the basics of HTML, those kinds of things. And it just stuck. It just made so much more sense than print and advertising has ever done to me. And it's so much more exciting. And so I pursued digital through various different agencies for, I guess, around 10 years. I was in small agencies, very, very big global agencies, and then I was in this very small agency, which I very much loved working in, and we had a great time, but it collapsed pretty much. And I started looking around for something to do next. And I started meeting lots of people, and I started talking to lots of agencies and kind of doing the default thing that I had done before. And I soon came to realize that it was the same kind of challenges and the same kinds of problems and opportunities, just with different colored walls. And then I met a friend of mine who I'd known for a little while, who was working in-house, who was working kind of client side at a tech startup, like a tech sort of music startup, which doesn't exist anymore, sadly. And I remember saying to him, "Why on earth you're such a good designer, why on earth would you be in-house? Isn't that where," and at the time I thought, "Isn't that where like the rubbish designers go because they can't get jobs in agencies?" And he told me how it worked, and he told me he described the ownership over the product that he had, and he described how you don't just get one shot at something, and that actually you have the opportunity to really move an organization forwards. And that just was just a really terrifying thought. So I thought, that's what I want to do. So I joined a very big global, very old finance company who had never employed a digital designer of any kind. There was something like 80,000 people working in this organization, and they'd never had a digital designer, let alone a UX department. So I was the first who showed up there, and just kind of said, "I can't use this laptop, and I can't work in these ways, and I need all this special software and all these kinds of things." And it started from there, and then we just grew it and grew it and grew it, and we continued to build and build. And there was, there was, I think, around 50 of us in the team. And wow. We kind of got consumed into the global part of the organization, and we spanned all the different parts of all the different continents that the organization covered, and we sort of trotted around the world teaching people how we were working and showing people what we were doing. And so even from agencies to that point, a lot of what I was doing was building new things, because I was quite early on into the digital space, and I found myself in these organizations saying things like user testing and saying things like collaborative sketching, and people were just looking at me like I was some sort of idiot. And so it was, a lot of it was, if it wasn't building teams, it was always building understanding. And then around a year ago, this opportunity came up at Virgin Atlantic to build a new user experience team, because they didn't have a formally organized a formally stood up user experience team. They'd never had a head of UX before. And I just thought, I can't miss that opportunity. I mean, Virgin Atlantic is such a attractive brand, and such an attractive organization that I signed up to that about a year ago. And so since then, I've set about restructuring, reorganizing, and building a new team, which is comprised of product designers, content team, research, and product managers. So that's what I do now. Our remit covers all the digital experience for Virgin Atlantic.
So Virgin Atlantic has always struck me as a company who has a great user experience. So what is different now than it was before? I mean, how was the user experience structured, or the user experience team? Were there UX designers? Were there UX researchers at all? Or I mean, how was the thought process behind user experience?
It was very different to how it is now. So now the balance is tipped very much in the favor of in-house talent and resource and creativity, whereas previously it was much more skewed towards suppliers and agencies and consultants. Previously, because we didn't have a central user experience team, we had no people or in fact person who was specifically responsible for the entirety of the user experience. And so it was happening, but in a very kind of divided and very fractured way. You know, whether you formalize it and turn it into a practice or not, there's always going to be digital touch points, and there's always going to be a user experience that's created if it's thoughtfully curated and built or not. And so it was more a case of it kind of happening as a side effect in many ways, and it was also happening as a byproduct of larger, bigger products. And what's different now is that me and my team are there to create the overview, which maybe wasn't as easily accessible before. So we can sit and we can look at what's happening on the website versus the app versus the kiosks versus the in-flight entertainment, and draw them all together so that they have a degree of consistency now and they're not pulling apart. And also to ensure that we're as efficient as possible. You know, if in one part of the business or in one type of interaction, someone's trying to solve a problem that's already been solved elsewhere, my team is now able to draw that together to ensure that we're not trying to sort of copy over our own lines, as it were.
And do you know how that switch in priority or in organization came about within Virgin, from this sort of more project-based UX, as it sounds, to a more strategic view of it inside the company?
Yeah. I mean, the good thing for me is that it came from senior leadership. This is not something that necessarily was a kind of grassroots movement with the executive board ignoring it. This is very much a case of the senior leadership recognizing that there was a difference between the brand experience and the physical experience of being on our planes and in our clubhouses versus the digital experience, and we needed to close that gap. There was also a recognition from the leadership team that from an e-commerce perspective, the channel wasn't performing as they would expect it to, according to industry benchmarks. So it came from that point. And so before my role was created, the vice president of digital and distribution role was created. That's my boss. And they looked at the team and decided that we needed to invest in more people and change the model. And so that's where my role came from. That's where it came from leadership. It came from the leadership recognizing that it needed to move and that it was an area that wasn't as good as it could be and should be.
So you had the buy-in from the top, basically, from day one. But so how do I need to imagine that if we go 1 or 2 years back, and you get this monumental task of building a UX practice at Virgin? I mean, how do you prepare for something like that? Like what was your thought process? What was your thinking at the time? How are you going to accomplish this?
At the time, I did a lot of research on a lot of reading, and I wrote an awful lot of notes, and I spoke to a lot of people, and I took advantage of industry events, and I took advantage of people's goodwill and good nature to steal lots of things. In retrospect, though, I can look back and say that I wasn't prepared enough. You know, I can very easily see things that I massively overlooked when I was preparing. But at the time, yeah, I read Wikipedia pages around the organization. I read lots of press releases. I picked up a copy of Richard Branson's book, where he walks through in great detail how the airline was created, because I wanted to understand where it had come from. I used, like I said, industry events where I knew other design leaders were going to be there, and I spoke to them. I went on Slack channels. I asked lots of questions of people, and I captured it all. I used Dropbox paper to capture a lot of notes, and there was a few kind of key books that I read along the way that I furiously scribbled notes into, and still kind of keep around and go back to.
Do you remember the name of those books?
Yeah.
Maybe interesting for the...
Yeah. The How to Build a Content Team by Rachel McConnell, Org Design for Design Orgs, Peter Meerholz, Kirsten Skinner. I read Orbiting the Giant Hairball, which is a fascinating book. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. There was a lot in there, I think. Yeah.
Maybe what we'll do is I'll ask you again at the end, and then we'll send that via email as well, so they have some resources to dig into. Okay, so, and then we forward a little bit. Day one, let's say maybe the first 3 months or so. How did that look like? So day one, you came in, and then what did you spend your time on?
The whole thing I approached like a design project. So before I actually started, I did a lot of reading, I did a lot of research. And then as I started, I really focused on listening to people. That was really what I did in the vast majority of the first 2 months at least. I bought a stack of notebooks, I numbered all my notebooks, and I got to talk to as many people as I possibly could. I asked them a very similar set of questions so that I had something to compare. And really what I was trying to dig into was, in the same way that you do with stakeholder interviews, like, what's your perception of the team currently? What's your perception of the digital experience today? What frustrates you? Where do you see opportunities? Where is it being good? Those kinds of things. And I did that with all of the people that surround the team today. So the marketing teams, the customer experience teams, the operation team, the airport teams, procurement teams, IT teams, our partners in our joint venture at Delta. I just met as many people as I could possibly meet. I then had one-to-ones with pretty much everybody who was in the digital team at the time. And I asked them what they were worried about. I asked them if I could change anything, what would it be? I asked them if you told me to not change one thing, what would that be? You know, that kind of stuff. I kind of did like kind of like a retrospect, but in reverse. Like, you know, if this has all gone terribly wrong in the next year, what would I have done wrong? Those kinds of things. And I wrote everything down. I looked for commonalities. I looked for themes. I then kind of, as you do with user research, I then kind of assimilated it to work out where my opportunities were, And I pretty much just tried to shut up for the first few months and not say too much, because there's a real temptation when you get in to just start doing the things that you've done before, and just to start repeating things that went well before, and start to impose things that you have put in place previously. But I didn't want to do that, and I stopped myself from doing that, knowing that Virgin Atlantic is such a special organization that for me to try and just repeat old tricks would not be doing it service. So it was really just trying to listen. But the thing that's very special about Virgin Atlantic is that it's a very fast moving company. So even though it is a big organization, there's more than 10,000 people that work for Virgin Atlantic. It moves very, very quickly. And so whilst I was trying to accumulate all this information and understand everything, we were still delivering projects at a fast rate. We were still having to make decisions and move very quickly on things, and respond to changes that were happening around the business. So it was a lot to take in. It felt like that scene from Clockwork Orange where he has to watch all of those films at a fast rate and just feed it all into his brain really quickly. It was a lot like that. Yeah, I was exhausted after the first few months.
So, I mean, how did you then, so if you say you had a lot of interviews, but you also needed to deliver projects, how did you then introduce this new practice? Was this, how do I need to imagine that? Is that you did this bit by bit at certain parts of the organization, or you said like, okay, so it's like a big switch, we do it here, we do it like this now, or how do I need to imagine?
Yeah, I realized very quickly that a big switch on was not going to work in this instance. We were still moving, because there were people in the team who had been in the team for time and were doing very hardworking and very bright group of people who were already part of digital. That if I just came in and said, okay, everybody, from Monday this is all different, that would just be just a mess, I think, which we probably wouldn't recover from a long time. So what I did was, before I hired anybody, before I started recruiting, I used a small agency called Clear Left, who were kind of on this particular project. And I sat down with them and I said, well, these are the kind of roles that I want you to bring. And this is how I want you to, work. And I made them work near our kitchen. So I didn't, which was kind of crappy for them, but it was really important to me that they were right in the middle of the office and everyone could see them. So you couldn't kind of walk around our office without seeing them. And they had Post-it notes and they had all the designs on the wall, and they were, doing collaborative sketching sessions, and there was a content strategy piece and a research piece that was all happening there. And it was, I guess for them, it was like being inside a cage in a zoo. But for me, it was very important because it became very visible and people could see it. And then I brought people from various teams and from various parts of the business into the design sprints, so they could kind of dip their toe into it quite gently. And I could introduce it as, I'm doing this because I'm trying this out and I want your feedback. So again, like a design project, I created a prototype in this team and tried it out. And there are parts that didn't quite work, and there are parts that had to be changed as we were going along. And there were parts that were very successful. And so when I did that, then when I said, okay, well, now I'm going to recruit, so we have a permanent role for that person that you've just been working with and you really liked, people were much more comfortable with that, rather than me just saying, hey, there's this new role that we don't have that I think is very important and I'm going to go hire this person. That just raises a lot of questions immediately. So we started small, and we introduced it that way. And in part of me going to talk to people around the business, there was always a portion whereby I had to describe myself and my team and my role. So they'd kind of got an introduction to what was going to happen. they then saw it happening in a small kind of little pod. And then today I think people are much more accepting of it because there's now a big group of us.
That's interesting. Okay, so first you read a lot, then you listened a lot, got in all this information. You did sort of a prototype with Clear Left inside the team, and then started hiring. What was the next step in terms? I mean, I'm sure you had some objections as well. What were the obstacles that were coming up along the way up until this point, and then also hiring new people, probably some restructuring of teams as well, or how did that work? What was
all of those things? Yeah, it was all of those things. There was obstacles. There was difficulty in the parts of the team that I was responsible at the start didn't necessarily fit into the models and the roles that I wanted to create. And so you can either do that piece by piece and take a very long time to gradually move people, or you can just do it as one sort of sweeping across and say, okay, everybody, we're going to change all of this. And so in that instance, I opted for the change to happen in one go, which is hard, and actually, not really something that I wanted to do or enjoyed doing necessarily. And I hoped, my aim in that was that we would make the change and everybody would be into new positions and perhaps in new teams and perhaps in new roles, and we would then move forward. And that actually wasn't the case, because there was one person who just decided they didn't want to do that. They didn't like the change that I was bringing in, and they kind of just dropped out of the process, which was, it was really hard. That wasn't fun at all. But everybody else kind of moved along with it, and so we had to do sort of that kind of initial bit of moving things around, and that was really because the team was very, very small at the time, and what we've grown to now is much, much bigger. And when you're small, it's okay to have people who have got lots of different aspects of their job. It's okay for someone to be doing a bit of research and a bit of content and maybe a bit of delivery and then maybe a bit of project management. That's okay. But when there's 15 or 20 of you, but when there's 50 or 60 of you and you've got specialists, that's kind of less comfortable as a fit. And so a lot of it was kind of tidying up job titles and job roles. That was, I think, probably one of the most difficult and challenging parts to it, because no matter how positive you make the situation and how many opportunities you create, and no matter how much you want everybody to come along the ride with you, there are people that just aren't going to do that. There are people that aren't going to accept change. There are people that aren't going to let go of how things were previously, and that they maybe just don't like you. It's just
you always have some sort of resistance, right?
And I'll be honest with you, I'm not very good at that, actually, because I want everyone to be friends and I want everyone to try and kind of get on with me and get on board with it. So when they don't, it's tough, but it's the reality of the situation, right? We're moving, and if you don't want to move, then we're not. This is a big organization that's moving very quickly, so it doesn't stop or divert for one person or two people or whatever.
So maybe in that sense, how has, let's say, a failure or an apparent failure set you up for later success? I mean, do you have like a favorite failure of yours that, let's say, later led to a big learning that then led to something good?
There's so many to choose from, but I would say think one of the things that I learned very quickly, and one of the things which I addressed, was when we stood up our first product team, when we kind of first formally said, this is a product manager, designer, research, and dev, and you all sit together and you're now a product team and you have this area. I pretty much just kind of took them to the edge and then just threw them all in, and they just started. And it was, I mean, they were fantastic. The first product team stood up, they were amazing. And I just thought, if they can get to the end of a sprint without punching one another, then that's good. In an actual fact, they just did really well and performed really fantastically and delivered a lot. But in retrospect, what I didn't do with them, and what I have since adjusted to, is taking that new product team and taking them out of the building, out of the area, and sitting them down in a room and collectively going through what that product vision is, what the roadmap looks like and why it looks like that, how you're going to get from where you are today to what that product vision is stating, and then socializing and actually just getting to know one another. Because, I've brought together a whole bunch of people who have by and large never worked together. Some of whom have never worked in airlines. Some people have never worked in-house. Some people have never worked in these kinds of product teams. Almost everyone new to Virgin Atlantic. So that kind of coming together and just getting to know one another and getting comfortable with one another, I think is a step that I learned to take before I threw them all in working together.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay, cool. And then, so what advice would you give sort of a smart, driven, aspiring design leader who is about to enter into a similar role, or maybe also at a smaller company? What advice would you give that you know now that you maybe didn't know beforehand? And also maybe what advice should they ignore? Because there's a lot of advice out there. I'm still here with me? Martyn, are you still here? Oh, now we don't hear you anymore, I think.
Is that better? Sorry, you broke up just a little bit there. So what advice would I give to somebody who's just starting in a similar situation?
Can be at a smaller company, but also could also be at a larger company. Just from what you've learned, what advice would you give an aspiring design leader? How can they start a practice inside a company?
Well, I think there's three things really that I would say that I think is pretty transferable as ideas, regardless of the size of the team and the size of the organization and the scope of what you've been asked to do or what you have found the opportunity to do. So the first one, the risk of sounding like an advert for the ECommerce Design Summit is there's loads of really great events out there. There's lots of Slack channels. There's lots of Medium articles. There's tons of stuff happening on Twitter and conversations that are design leaders, aspiring design leaders, all trying to figure this out. I think the first thing is just recognize that you are not in any way, shape, or form alone. And one of the wonderful things about the UX community is how open it is and how much it shares. So I would just say get to as many events as possible, meet as many people as possible, say yes to everything, reach out to people who you think are doing good stuff and just ask if you can, just go buy them a coffee and pick their brains. I do it all the time, and I to this day I don't think anyone's ever said, get lost, I'm too busy. Everyone's kind of very open and accepting. So just make full use of that, because we work on the web, we are creating the web, and it's a very open and giving place, and it can be very supportive. So absolutely get on board with that. And whether or not it's small kind of events, local events like Tech Circus, or whether or not it's bigger things like leading design in New York and London or wherever, that just throw yourself into all of it, because there is guaranteed somebody who's doing something or has done something very similar to what you're doing and has probably already figured it out and is quite happy to share that with you. The second thing I would say is learn to tell stories within your organization. I think that's very, very important, and it's something which I have sort of struggled with in the past, and I'm still learning how to do. But anytime your team does something, anytime that something happens, or a win happens in your team, you have to find a way to share that with people. You have to find opportunities that are unexpected to get that information out to people and tell people why that's good and how it was good and how it benefits them. And we've done everything so far from getting on the company intranet and writing stuff and putting screen grabs on there. Like I said, we put people out in our kitchen space and just made them work there and allow people to walk around inside it. We created great big posters with our work on and some of the results, and we stuck them on the walls. We've left artifacts and research things out in reception, and we've done all sorts of stuff, and we just keep finding ways to get up and present to people, even if it's a group of people who you don't think are directly impacted. Just learn to tell that story, because I think that's really important. And then the third thing I would say is that every business, every organization, every place that a design team exists, whether you're on the agency side or in-house, they will have inevitably formed some sort of language that's their own, right? They will have inevitably started to use certain acronyms, certain phrases, and there are certain keywords, trigger words, flag words, and phrases that people respond to. And I think as a design leader, or in fact, anyone working in user experience, it's your job to understand what that is and how to speak it. And I think it's totally normal for organizations to have their own set of languages. And every time I go into a new place and I sit inside a meeting room, most of the time I'm just writing down acronyms because I don't understand what people are saying and trying to figure it out. So we even have like a translation, like a phrase book, which I've written.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And it kind of, on the left-hand side, it says, this is what people are saying and this is what it means to you, those versions of it. And I think that relates to the first two as well, because if you were trying to explain the value of doing a user test, for example, or making an enhancement to a UI, or improving a content structure through a particular part of the experience, for you to say that I need the time to do this, or I need the money to do this, or I need the resource to do this, or whatever, to somebody who's responsible for selling stuff, right? They're responsible for profit and loss. Why would that make any difference to them? Why would a nicer drop down mean anything to them? But if you said to them, by doing this, we're going to reduce, let's just call it, we're going to reduce the design debt. Like someone in sales, someone who's responsible for profit and loss, if you say the word debt to them, they're going to listen to you, right? If you said to someone in operations, by doing this work, we're going to cut down on the content overhead. But overheads are like poison to an operations team. They don't want overheads. They want to keep those as minimal as possible. So you just have to learn what that language is, and consider the fact that when we talk about user-centered design, we talk about design ops, we talk about design systems, we talk about content hierarchies. That means nothing to the vast majority of the population, and it's not. I don't think it's healthy for us to get frustrated and cross when people don't get it, because we've created our own language, right, and way of talking, and we need to recognize that. So those three things I would say to watch out for, and also just make sure you get a lot of sleep as well.
That's always good advice. Yeah, I think it's especially important to show that kind of empathy towards other departments, even if you know you're doing the right thing with bringing good user experience into the company. It's as important, especially if you have you don't have the buy-in from the top, maybe. So you need to do a bit more grassroots. What I've seen a lot with our customers or our user base, where that's often a big challenge as well.
Yeah.
Have you had to work in a company where you had to sort of earn the buy-in as well,
Yeah,
and how is
absolutely.
that different, and how do you approach that? Because I know a lot of people listening here have that issue as well.
Yeah, well, don't get me wrong. We have a fair set of challenges at Virgin Atlantic. The streets are not paved with gold, and we don't get carried out on people's shoulders every day. But yeah, so the last place I worked, I was there for 8 years, and there was really no executive level buy-in to what we were doing, and it started very much from having to prove it at every single step. And in those instances, when we were in-house, it was very much a case of leaning on the practicalities and the production aspect of it. So it was very much a case of saying, okay, well, I can do this with my tool set here within a couple of hours. This agency or those consultants, they're going to charge you 3 or 4 days worth of work, and kind of just continually telling that story of we can move much faster here. And then I think when you're in house, it's facing into and leaning into the fact that you are now fully accountable. So when you're in an agency, it's a very different game, because if you deliver something and it doesn't work, you can walk away. You can't do that in house, and so being unafraid to put your neck on the line and just say, I'm going to try this, and if it doesn't work, I will try again. That's, I think, very, very important. But if you don't have buy-in and if you don't have recognition, in my last job, no one ever asked us to scale up our team. No one ever said to us, okay, there's 2 of you now we should have 50. That never happened. It happened because we just kept saying, look what we've done, look at how much we've done with just 2 or 3 people. If you give us 5 more people, we can do twice this much. And then we did that, and then we said, okay, well, now we've got 10 people. If you give us another 10, we can do twice as much, and we can do it for more people. So it comes back to that second point of telling stories. If you can demonstrate your value, be it through how fast you work, be it through multivariate testing, be it through longer term strategies, be it through bringing together completely new partnerships, opening up new revenue, whatever that thing is, learn how to demonstrate it, because it's absolutely vital for us. Because good design and well-crafted user experiences always equals business benefit. It always does. If you're doing it properly, it always does. You only have to look at the fact that Apple is the first $1 trillion business on the planet to win that argument. So that's pretty straightforward. But we're not very good as a community of showing that and telling people that and explaining that. So I would say in that way around. But then in an agency, it's totally different, because you're in there just to prove everything that you can in that first instance, because you may not get a second instance. So I think with agencies, it's 100% about being proactive. And if a company comes to you and says, I just want you to put this thing on my homepage and make it red, right? Sure, right. I'll do that. But then I'll also do these other things, because I think you might want to see that. And here's the reasons why I've done this as well. So it's a lot of just going the extra mile, I think, in those instances.
Cool. I could talk another. Well, we're already at 45 minutes, actually.
Oh, sorry. Wow.
No, that's quite okay. Super interesting. So just quickly, 1 or 2 more questions. So what is your contribution actually to the ECommerce Summit this year? And what is the focus of your session, and who is it for as well?
Who's it for? the session that I was going to do was essentially I was going to run through the past year of building a team at Virgin Atlantic and really just highlight all the things that I've done wrong, which will probably take all of the time that I have, and just put it out there so that people can learn from it and understand it and hopefully avoid some of the things that I did wrong, and maybe, you know, hopefully share some things for me to watch out for. Who's it for? I mean, it's for anyone who is working in a user-centered design practice where it is, I guess, specifically about e-commerce, because the bottom line is that we're selling airline tickets, is the main thrust of what we're doing, and so we are continually balancing this desire to create a beautiful experience that customers love with being commercially viable and trading on to a profit and loss team. So it's about kind of finding those balances and all the times that I messed up and how you can avoid my mistakes.
That sounds very interesting. So we don't have to make the mistakes ourselves. That's
hopefully great.
Yeah. A final question: what are sort of your favorite? I mean, you mentioned some books, but maybe that changed now that you are in the practice. What are some of your favorite books, online resources, and tools that you're using on a daily basis that you can recommend?
I steal a lot from Medium. I think there's some very, very bright people writing some incredible stuff on Medium. I don't think you have to look very far to see that. I think there's a lot of bigger tech companies now that are opening up their design process and their thinking in a very, kind of wonderful sharing way that I derive a lot from. Companies like Airbnb have Airbnb.design, similarly, Deliveroo and those kinds of companies. I spend a lot of time inside those because I think the things that I'm interested in at the moment are more about the kind of practical running of teams rather than is this the right use of Figma and is that the best way of kind of plugging these things into Sketch. Those things that kind of I leave to my team now.
All right, so Medium is the medium to learn.
Medium.
Great.
Yeah.
So where can people connect with you online before we head into the Q&A? By the way, if you still have questions, you can write them now. Where can people find you online?
I'm pretty easy to find online because I have a ridiculous spelling of my name. So you only have to Google me and you can find me anywhere. I love chatting on Twitter and I spend a lot of time messing about on there. I write things occasionally on Medium and I'm pretty easy to get hold of. As long as you spell my name correctly, you'll find me.
All right. Thank you. Okay, let's quickly jump in. So in a few questions right now. Andrea, what are major cultural changes which happened in order to reach the state where you are now?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. So one is nothing changed in order for me to reach my state. I pretty much changed it. There was nothing that, other than the VP role and the kind of the closer view on the digital team at Virgin Atlantic and the greater emphasis on improving it. That's kind of what changed from an organizational perspective. But culturally, I think all the cultural changes has had to happen as a result of the things that we're doing. Does that make sense? It kind of is the other way around, actually. We sort of made the changes and then the culture shifted. So in that respect, the culture has changed by, I would say, working more out in the open, working more as collective groups rather than project teams. We have shifted to people owning very specific parts of the journey. So we have a group of people who are responsible for the kind of top of the funnel. We have a group of people who are wholly responsible for the booking flow. We have a bunch of people who are responsible for the loyalty part, that kind of stuff, which has moved away from I delivered this project and I delivered that project. And we've kind of as a result, broken down a few of the kind of perceptual barriers between disciplines as well. Now that they're all formed into product teams, I think those are the things that have changed, and the speed at which we work, that's certainly changed.
Anne-Marie is asking, how do you measure design success?
Good question. That's a great question. So we have our own set of metrics, which is nothing unusual. It's the same thing that you'll find in most organizations, like conversion rates, value of sale, that kind of stuff. We measure customer satisfaction. So we have survey scores. But the reality is that as I said before, commercial success and design success, they don't have to be viewed as separate things. If you design something that's kind of a beautiful experience, people will comfortably buy into it, and they won't feel begrudged to buy into it, and they'll come back to buy more of it. So design success is business success. I don't think they need to be separate things. If sales improve, you can look at the fact that the design has helped that and contributed towards that.
Then we have a question from Damon. How do you acquire insights from your user base, and how often are you speaking to users at this point?
Not enough, Damon. I think we should be talking to our users every week, and I would love to get up to that point where we're talking to them every day. We certainly get information. We get a lot of data, being an e-commerce team. We've got sales data and on-site analytics and that kind of stuff. And we get, like I said, we have a customer survey, which we get back a lot. But it's something that I'm working on at the moment, actually. It's something that I'm trying to make just habitual. I would like us to get to a point where there's almost always somebody in a lab with a prototype. There's always almost somebody. It's something which we're kind of working towards, but I don't think we've got it right. I think that I don't know if I'm ever going to be satisfied with how much we talk to users, actually. Now I'm saying that. I think it's just something which you're always striving towards, right?
But it's refreshing to hear, because from the outside, it can always look like that the big companies have it all figured out. But you can always talk. You can always talk more to users.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Then Jonathan is asking around the storytelling you were mentioning. He's saying, "Hi Martyn, when you're telling your story internally, how do you introduce what UX is all about?" So that's maybe how you started out, when this was all new as well. And so he's saying, I'm trying to talk more about my team internally now too.
Yeah.
So your tips have been helpful already, but maybe you can talk about how you actually introduce the topic itself.
Do you know, I genuinely, Jonathan, I don't think I ever did. I don't think I ever sat down and tried to explain what that is. What I have done instead is explain why I was in the organization, and again use terms that would kind of trigger a response. So I said that I'm going to reduce spend on agencies. I'm going to create more accountability, that kind of thing. So I never actually kind of specifically explained user experience. I explained the outcomes that we would create. I explained that we would be helping them. I'd explain that we would be reducing the cost of their projects. I explained that we would be moving faster and delivering more. I explained that we would be doing things that were going to increase conversion because they were more user-centered, and that they, and increase retention and loyalty and those kinds of things. So I don't know that I ever did explain user experience. Maybe I should do that.
So you sort of always phrased it around, what's in it for them, and how you can help them, right? How you can help
because
them.
I'll be honest, if someone sat down with me and they tried to explain the importance of pricing strategy, I'd probably fall asleep. I mean, I don't mean, why do I need to know that? But if it impacts what I'm doing, then I'll listen. Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, and I like your idea of the phrase book, where you literally sat down in meetings and wrote down the terms that sparked some interest as well. That's a really good
and the
technique.
acronyms
Like
too, because I just did, there's a lot of acronyms that I took a long time to get my head around, and so like I said, I've introduced lots of new people into the organization as I've built my team, and I just hand it to them so they can fast forward through all the stuff that I had to kind of embarrassingly either Google or ask someone quietly in a corridor, like, what does that mean? Why are they talking about that?
Yeah, that's good. Okay, so we have, let's do 2 more questions. Lutz is asking, how do you work today with the customer experience team? Like, I mean, how is that structured?
Yeah, our customer experience team is, I have to be honest, they're kind of amazing, and I'm pretty much in awe of them all the time. So the customer experience at Virgin Atlantic take care of a huge spectrum of customer touch points, from the cabin crew to the staff in the lounges to the call centers, to the industrial design of the interiors of the planes and those kinds of things. So they have there's a huge spectrum of things that they work on, and loads of it connects to what I do on a daily basis. And so much like the marketing team and lots of the other teams, in my first 3 months, I just kind of I spent a lot of time walking up and down the stairs to go talk to them as often as I could. In our building, we had this big red staircase, like through the center of it, that connects all the different floors. And after the first couple of months, I had some killer calf muscles because I just gone up and down those stairs continually. So it started very much with me just approaching them and saying, I just want to learn more. I just want to understand what you're doing, and I want to see, and I want to help, and I want to connect. Today, now, when the product designers do design reviews and we look at UI, we bring in their industrial designers and their interior designers, and they sit in our design reviews and give us feedback. When the design teams in customer experience are creating prototypes, and their prototypes are way more exciting than ours because they're great big foam wooden models of stuff. We go in and we kind of talk about those, how can we replicate those spaces in user labs, and perhaps do some user testing to how people would use their screens in those spaces. We're trying to get better, and we're making an effort to spend time at the call centers and listening to calls on a regular basis so we can understand how they work. We just try and stay as close as we possibly can, and just invite them to everything. And if they don't show up, don't get too worried. And if they do show up, just share everything openly as you can.
Nice. Good practice for sure. Very last question from Derek. How do you balance line managing individual people and sort of managing upwards towards your VP, I guess? I mean, how much time does each take? I mean, are you
managing upwards is an interesting phrase, isn't it? I don't know that I have ever made a concerted effort to manage my manager. I think she'd see right through me, actually, and probably stop that quite quickly.
Well, I guess it's part like also expectation management and stuff like that.
Yeah, I see what you mean. So again, that's kind of more about making sure that everyone is coming along and understanding the stories that we're telling. What I tend to do with my line manager is, rather than save it all up for a month or 2 months and then have an hour and just download all my anxieties and questions and everything, we have kind of just these regular small catch-ups. They're not as structured as daily stand-ups by any measure, but we talk 2 or 3 times every single week. And sometimes it can just be a kind of, how you doing? Good. How you doing? Great. What's going on this week? Done. And other times it can be, I really need to know this, or I've got something I really need to tell you. I write a lot of keynotes. I write a lot of presentations that package up, and I try and get very complex things into very short, digestible chunks, because the higher up stakeholders go in terms of management hierarchies, the less time they have. So the more you can boil things down to snack size pieces of information, the better. What's the balance between those two things? I mean, I would say it's probably 90% working on the team and then 10% managing expectations upwards.
All right, that was it. Damon is asking, can I come work for you? I would
Sure.
suggest you hit Martyn up on Twitter or something, and
come on board, Damon.
Cool. Thank you very, very much, Martyn.
Thank you.
Super insightful, and I hope we get to do this again, version 2. And for everyone who wants to see Martyn in April, go to the ECommerce Design Summit and hear more about his mistakes and what he learned from it. Thank you very much, Martyn. Thanks, you very much, everyone, for listening. Bye. Thank you.